When I died, the dormitory window was bolted. From the outside, flames licked through the cheap curtains, plastic wiring crackled above. My head and the girls on the upper bunks screamed until the smoke filled their lungs. I had just finished my third night shift in a row at the electronics factory. My hands still smelled of solder. In the pocket of my work jacket was the remittance slip for the money I had meant to send home the next morning. After the fire, my spirit floated above the factory courtyard and watched the world go on without me. My father took the compensation, money with trembling hands. My mother cried so hard that people praised her for loving her daughter. My younger brother asked whether there would be enough left to cover the down payment on his marriage apartment. My husband-to-be from the neighboring village did not cry at all. He only muttered that it was a pity I had died before the wedding, because now the bride price had gone to waste. That was the moment I understood my whole life. I had not been raised as a daughter. I had been stored like dry firewood stacked in a corner and saved for the day the family needed me to burn. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the sky open with my hands. Instead, I heard a voice as cold and distant as winter water. If you're not willing, then go back. This time, choose differently. I opened my eyes on the dirt floor of our old house, 15 years old again, with the noon heat pressing against the paper window. Outside, the village loudspeaker was announcing the admission list for the county vocational school. On the kang beside me lay the blue plastic folder that had ruined my first life. Inside it was my acceptance notice for the textile vocational program, the one my parents had forced me to attend because it was cheap and because, in their words, girls only needed enough education to send money home. I sat up so abruptly that my head struck the wall. The room was exactly as I remembered it. Cracked plaster, a crooked calendar, my brother's cartoon stickers covering the one good cupboard door. From the yard came my mother's voice, sharp as a knife. Shanglan, do not laze around. Change your clothes. We are going to town to pay the vocational deposit. I touched my own face and found hot tears already there. Not from sadness this time. From rage. I was alive.
I still had a chance.
I walked into the yard holding the blue folder. My father was mending a fishing net. My mother was plucking duck feathers beside a basin. My younger brother, Kiao Sheng, was leaning against the doorway eating iced watermelon with both hands, the sweet red juice dripping down his chin. In my last life, he had never once asked where my factory wages came from, but he had always known exactly. When they arrived, the sight of him made my stomach twist. You are finally up, my mother snapped. Hurry. The bus won't wait for you. I looked at the folder, then at her, and spoke more calmly. Then I felt, I'm not going to vocational
school.
I'm going to county number 1 high. My father froze with the fishing net in his hands. My brother actually laughed. Then my mother rose so fast the basin tipped over. Don't start your nonsense again. We already discussed this. There is no money for high
School.
There had been money in my first life. Not much, but enough. Enough for my father to buy my brother a second-hand motorbike. Enough for my mother to spend 2 months chasing lucky charms and fertility prescriptions. After some village fortune teller said our family's future depended on the son's auspicious year. Enough for them to say there was no money only. When it came to me, this time I did not cry or plead. I opened the blue folder, took out the vocational notice and tore it clean in half. My mother's scream startled the chickens in the yard. My father strode over and raised his hand. I did not flinch. If you hit me today, I said, I will walk barefoot to the county education office and ask them whether a student admitted to the best high school in the county is supposed to be forced into vocational school because her brother wants a new phone. His hand stopped in midair. He was not afraid of being cruel. He was afraid of losing face. That afternoon, my eldest aunt came over from the township, exactly as she had in my previous life, with her polished shoes, city handbag, and the expression of someone who believed she understood the world because she had once ridden the train twice in 1 year. She sat at our table sipping tea and explaining why a pretty girl should learn tailoring instead of algebra. In my first life, I had listened with my head lowered until her words became my own chains. This time, I interrupted before she finished her second sentence. Auntie, I said, if vocational school is so good, then why did not you let your own daughter go? Why did you borrow money and send her to senior high in the city? Her cup stopped halfway to her lips. My mother hissed my name in warning, but I went on. Don't worry. I'm not asking your family for a single yuan. I know exactly how precious your advice is and how little your money moves. My aunt's face darkened. She left before dinner, muttering that girls who talked back never ended well. That night, the oil lamp burned until late. My parents thought I had fallen asleep, but I heard every word through the thin wall. 1,800 yuan for tuition and fees, my mother whispered. Even if we sold the piglets, it would not be enough. My father said what he had said in my first life too. Then, let her quit. If she is stubborn enough to want high school, let her pay for it herself. I lay in the dark, staring at the roof beams. In my last life, those words had sounded like a death sentence. This time they sounded like terms of battle. Before dawn, I tied my hair up, put on my cleanest shirt, and left for the county on the first minibus with 70 yuan hidden in the hem of my trousers. On the ride there, I watched the field slide by and forced myself to think, not panic. In my previous life, I had spent 13 years in factories, dormitories, rented rooms, and other people's kitchens. I knew now what my 15-year-old self had not known. They were always small. Cracks in the wall if you looked hard enough. My first idea was to go to old Master Ren, the owner of the grain store in town. In my last life, I had heard that he quietly sponsored students every year, but I had never dared approach him. At 15, I still believed gratitude had to be deserved before it could be requested. At 28, burned to death, with unpaid overtime in my pocket, I understood that survival came first. I found his grain store near the bus station, the doorway piled high with feed sacks and rice barrels. Master Ren listened to me while checking accounts with an abacus. When I finished, he asked only one question. If I lend this to you, how will you repay me? I straightened my back. By passing the entrance exam for university, by winning scholarships, by taking work after school, by living on less than other people do. I paused. And if I fail, I will still repay you. It may take longer, but I will do it. He looked at me for so long that I started to feel the sweat on my palms. Then he shook his head. I thought I had lost. Instead, he said, not because I do not believe you. Because if I give a village girl cash directly, every uncle and cousin within 10 miles will hear of it by evening. They will come to her house before she can even pay her fees. My heart sank, but he raised one finger. Wait here. He disappeared into the back room and returned with a canvas bag. In it were 3 exercise books, 2 used reference manuals for senior high mathematics and physics, and an envelope. Take this. Straight to the school finance office, he said. It is made out to the school, not to you. Let us see who dares snatch it on the road. When I opened the envelope in a public restroom with shaking fingers, there was a bank draft for 1,500 yuan and a note in rough handwriting. The rest, find yourself. If you can't find 300 yuan, then perhaps you're not desperate enough yet. Under the note was a name I knew, only faintly from village gossip, Sun Lihua, owner of the stationery shop beside county number 1 high. Show her this note if you need work. I pressed the paper to my chest and cried silently for exactly 1 minute, then washed my face and went to find the stationery shop. Sun Lihua turned out to be a widowed woman in her 40s with cropped hair and a voice like dry bamboo. She read Master Ren's note and looked me up and down. You can stack notebooks, wrap textbooks, and sweep the floor. After school, she said, 10 yuan a day on weekdays, 12 on weekends, and any damaged test papers are yours for free. If you are lazy, I will throw you out myself. If you are diligent, I do not care where you came from. I agreed before she finished speaking. That was how I got the missing 300 yuan. I skipped lunch for 4 days, slept on the bus twice, and by the end of the week, I had paid my tuition to county number 1 high with money that had passed through 4 different hands, but for the first time in my life had been claimed by my own will. When I stepped out of the finance office holding the stamped receipt, the sky looked so blue it hurt. I stood there in the schoolyard and laughed aloud like a mad person. The laughter did not last long. Late registrants were assigned wherever space remained, which meant I entered class 12 of the general track, a room on the 4th floor, with peeling green paint, a broken back door, and 48 students who had already divided themselves into neat, invisible hierarchies. The best seats were taken by children from cadre families and the worst by students like me, admitted through scores but without money, connections, or pretty confidence. My desk was beside the cleaning tools and the open window that never shut properly. Our homeroom teacher, Mr. Bao, wore polished leather shoes and a smile meant for parents. With envelopes, he glanced at my transfer
file, saw my rural address and county rank
scores, and said, since you're from a village, junior high, it will take time to adjust. Don't aim too high. Keep your feet on the ground. The classroom laughed softly. I sat down, opened my notebook, and wrote a sentence across the first page. The ground is not where I will stay. The first month was almost enough to drown me. My English was weak because my junior high had no qualified teacher for 2 years. My physics foundations were decent but patchy. My classmates in town had been learning from private tutors since middle school. They spoke of mock papers, Olympiad camps, and summer math classes as casually as my village spoke of the weather. At night in the dormitory, while the girls around me talked about television actors and which boys looked best in the new sports uniforms, I copied vocabulary under my blanket by flashlight until the batteries ran out. 3 weeks into term, the school announced a placement test for possible transfer into the experimental classes. It was not a guaranteed path, only a chance to be considered later, but I marked the date in red ink anyway. That same week, I met the person who would change the speed of my climb. I was shelving used exam books in Sun Lihua's shop when a tall boy in a washed-out white t-shirt walked in and asked whether the discounted problem sets had arrived. He had a clean forehead, a serious gaze, and the kind of quiet that did not come from shyness but concentration. You can take the unsold mock papers from last year for half price, Sun Lihua said. The boy hesitated at the total. I recognized that look immediately because I had seen it in every reflective surface of my own life. Before I thought too much, I spoke. If you only need physics and mathematics, do not buy the full set. The chemistry section repeats half the same problems. He turned to me. Later I would learn his name was Shen Yao, the top scorer of the current experimental class 1. That day, he simply asked, how do you know? Because I sorted them, I said. And because I read all of them after closing. He stared for a second, then the corner of his mouth lifted. He bought only physics and mathematics. The next evening he came back with a question he could not resolve from one of the solutions. I answered without thinking. He asked a second one. I answered that too. Son Li Hua snorted from behind the counter and said, if you two are going to turn my shop into a tutoring center, at least stack the newly delivered notebooks while you talk. That was how Shen Yao and I began, surrounded by ink, cardboard boxes, and cheap fluorescent lights, trading explanations over discount. Problem books? He was not from a rich family either, though. At first I could not tell. His father drove
long-distance freight routes.
His mother sold breakfast pancakes outside the textile market. Every dawn, he had won his place in the experimental class the old-fashioned way, by outtrunning everyone who underestimated him. He was also the sort of person who could spot a missing logical step from half a classroom away. When I told him frankly that I wanted to enter the experimental track by the end of the semester, he did not laugh. He only asked, how many hours do you sleep? I thought it was a trick question. Enough, I said. He looked at the dark circles under my eyes and said dryly, then you are already lying. The answer, as I later admitted, was about 5.5 on good nights. Shen Yao frowned in a way that made him look older than 16. If you collapse, rank won't matter. From then on, our study alliance came with rules. I had to sleep at least 6 hours before major tests. He had to eat the meat from his lunch instead of exchanging it for steamed buns, which he did more often than anyone knew. We checked each other's progress and called it efficiency rather than concern. Rumors still began, of course. A village girl and the first ranked boy in the experimental class speaking every day after school there was always a story people were eager to invent. One afternoon, Mr. Bao called me to the office and asked whether I had forgotten my purpose in school. I looked at the stack of graded papers on his desk and said honestly, my purpose is to get into the top 100 of the grade this year. If speaking to Shen Yao after school affects that, you may separate us. But if my scores rise, then perhaps what matters is not who I speak to, but whether I'm improving. He did not like being answered directly, but he also could not argue with numbers. My rank in the first monthly test was 312. In the second, 187. In the third, 129. The graph of my progress became a topic of quiet discussion among the teachers, and once numbers entered the conversation, social prejudice had to sit in the back row for a while. Still, the village would not leave me alone. Every time I went home for one weekend or another, some auntie or distant relative found a way to ask whether I had already trapped a city boy into helping my family climb upward. The most persistent of them was my mother's cousin, who lived 3 houses away and considered herself an expert in fate. In my first life, she had introduced me to the factory foreman I eventually agreed to marry, because I had believed there were no other exits. Now she blocked the alley with a basket of drying peanuts and said, girls who raid too much become picky. Picky girls end up old and cheap. I bent, picked one peanut from her basket, shelled it, and ate it before answering. Then I would rather be old than sold. Auntie, she cursed at my back all the way to the well. By winter, I had reached the experimental
Threshold.
The school posted the semester competition rules outside the academic office. The top 8 students in the general track could challenge the bottom 8 in the experimental classes based on final rank. Everyone treated it like a game show. For me, it was oxygen. Shen Yao brought me a stack of last year's finals papers tied with string. Son Li Hua stopped charging me for damaged test copies. Even the librarian, old Mr. Qin, began pretending not to notice that I sat in the reference room 30 minutes after closing whenever the weather turned too cold to study. In the dorm corridor, the night before the winter finals, the electricity in our dormitory failed in one entire wing. Girls shouted and laughed and used the darkness as an excuse not to review. I took my books and sat on the staircase, landing under the emergency light. Around midnight, someone climbed the stairs and placed a thermos by my knee. Sweet ginger water. Shen Yao whispered, don't thank me. My mother made too much for me to finish. When I opened it, there was a folded page tucked around the warm metal. Written on it was only one sentence. Tomorrow, you are not asking for a place. You are taking it. I took it. My rank after the winter finals rose to 48 in the entire grade. Of the 8 challenge seats, I won the 3rd. When the list went up outside the academic office, students crowded so tightly that someone tore one corner of the paper. My own name stood there in black ink under the experimental class roster, stark and almost unreal. For one full minute, I could not move. Then I remembered the girl who had died in a factory dorm with a remittance slip in her pocket, and my eyes burned so badly I had to look away. My victory made one person in the village especially unhappy. My father. Experimental class meant better teachers, longer hours, more likely university admission, and therefore, in his mind, more value to be extracted later. What he did not like was the time it would take. Spring festival of my second year in senior high, he announced over dinner that a local machinery boss had seen me carrying books through the market and thought I looked decent enough to become his son's future wife. A strong family, my father said. Good money. If the engagement is fixed now, they can help with your brother's training.
Fees.
I set down my bowl so carefully that not a drop of soup spilled. My mother watched me with the nervous expression of someone who already knew an explosion was coming and only hoped it would not touch her. My brother, now 14 and round-faced from being overfed, all his life kept chewing as if the conversation were about weather. I asked one question. Does the machinery boss's son know how to read? My father slammed his chopsticks down. What kind of question is that? The kind that decides whether I say yes or no. I replied. He can sign his name, my father snapped. He earns more in a month than a bookworm like you ever will. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I stood, walked into the next room, returned with my latest report card, and laid it in the middle of the table. Grade rank 16. Mathematics first in the grade.
Physics, second.
English 18. I tapped the paper. This is what I earn. Not now. Later. And if anyone in this house trades me for my brother's future before I have a chance to build my own, I will leave and never send back even one fen. The room went silent except for the hiss of the stove. My father struck me that night. He hit my shoulder, not my face, because bruises on the face show in school photographs and on television if you ever become the sort of student a school likes to display. He did not hit very hard. Perhaps he was already afraid of the possibility of me becoming exactly that sort of student. My mother put an herbal paste on the bruise afterward and whispered that I should not challenge him. I laughed without humor and asked her whether she had ever challenged anyone in her own life. She had no
Answer.
The next morning, the machinery boss marriage proposal vanished like mist. The second semester of senior year was a blade. Every day was divided into 40-minute units and measured in questions solved, pages memorized, errors corrected.
Shen Yao and I
Became tablemates in the front half of experimental class 1 after the seating.
shovel.
He still ranked first most months.
I
However, between 12th and 7th, some nights I felt I was climbing a sheer cliff. With my fingernails, my essay writing lagged, my English listening improved too slowly. Physics saved me. Mathematics steadied me. When I doubted myself, I went back to first. Principles,
force diagrams, functions.
cause, and effect. The world had wronged me, yes, but equations still told the truth. Then came the county simulation exam in late March, the one that changed my sense of scale. Forever. I ranked third in the county. Third, not first, not even second, but high enough that the headmaster called me to his office. With a smile he usually reserved for donor
Families.
he offered a school commendation, an extra meal subsidy, and a place in the summer. Provincial training camp if my rank remained
Stable.
I accepted the subsidy and declined the photo opportunity. The headmaster blinked. Most students would have cried from joy. I had already used up my crying on harder days. The provincial training camp cost money. Of course. Fees for materials, travel, hostel, deposit. I did not tell my family until the school required a signature. My father cursed. For a full 15 minutes, my mother asked whether girls really needed such complicated,
Mathematics to find husbands.
and my brother, to my genuine surprise, said, let her go. If she gets into a good university, people in the village will stop saying our family only raises useless men. Everyone turned to stare at him. He reddened and kicked the table leg. I'm just tired of them laughing at me too, he
Muttered.
It was the closest thing to solidarity we had ever had. At the provincial camp, I met students from prefecture-level cities who spoke faster, moved faster, and treated competition as if it were their native climate. The old inferiority feeling tried to crawl back into my bones. Then the first night I solved the camp's toughest kinematics problem before the instructor finished the hint. By the end of the week, I ranked 9th overall.
Not
Spectacular, but enough to prove to myself that talent was not a surname owned by city children. It was something sharpened by opportunity, and opportunity could be chased down if you were willing to bleed for it. Bleed, I did. During the final stretch before the university entrance examination, I developed cracks on both hands from the chalk, dust, and dry weather. I fell asleep twice over chemistry equations and once woke with my cheek pressed to a page so long that the ink had transferred to my skin. Shen Yao began arriving with 2 boiled eggs every Monday because he claimed his mother kept overestimating how much breakfast he could eat. I repaid him by correcting his classical Chinese annotations and quizzing him on English idioms while we walked between classrooms. We were each other's ladder. Neither of us said anything romantic.
there.
Was no room for softness we could not carry. Still, there were moments. A spring rain one evening soaked the sports field and trapped us under the eaves outside the laboratory building. The whole campus smelled of wet earth. Shen Yao stood beside me, hands in his pockets, looking at the rain as if it were a blackboard problem. Suddenly he said, if we both leave this county, what do you think? You will miss first. The question surprised me so much I answered truthfully. The librarian's old kettle. Sun Li was scolding. The ginkgo tree by the east wall. I paused, and maybe the feeling of knowing exactly how hard something is because I had to fight so much for it. He turned and looked at me with an unreadable
Expression.
Then he said quietly, I would miss having someone beside me who understands that. The examination days arrived in a heat wave. The city broadcasted health warnings every hour. Parents clustered outside the gates with fans, umbrellas, blessed amulets, and anxious
Prayers.
mine did not come for the first day because my father had taken a laboring job in another township, and my mother claimed the ducks would go thirsty if she left. I was not
Upset.
By then I had learned the difference between love and simple presence. Sun Liwa came instead in sandals and a faded blouse, carrying a bag of cut pears and salted water. Old Master Ren arrived on his bicycle and pretended he was only passing by. Shen Yao's mother pressed a packet of sticky rice into my
Hand.
I walked into the exam hall full of other people's ordinary kindness and felt stronger than I ever had in my life. Chinese composition first, mathematics next. On the afternoon of physics, thunder rolled across the county and rain hit the windows so hard that for several seconds the entire classroom sounded like a roof made of drums. My pen did not pause. I finished the last large problem with 6 minutes remaining and checked my derivation twice. When the invigilator called time, I set my pen down gently and thought of the girl in the burning
Dormitory.
the girl who had never gotten this
Far.
I had brought her with me into the examination hall. I would bring her across the line too. After the final English paper, the gates opened and the whole school spilled out into newly washed sunlight. Students screamed, cried, laughed, threw review notes into the air. Some collapsed into their parents' arms. Shen Yao found me near the bicycle shed, where I was standing under a jacaranda tree because the crowd felt too loud against my skin. He held out his hand. Soy milk, he said. What? We made a bet last autumn. Whoever ranked lower in the final county mock owes the other one. Month of breakfast. I stared, then laughed for the first time that week. Fine, I said. But if I beat you in the actual exam, I want soy milk and tea eggs. He smiled with his whole face. This time sunlight bright on his lashes. Deal. Results day should have been simple. It never is in stories like ours. The county education website crashed twice before noon. Then the power in our village went out. The internet cafe in town overflowed with anxious students and shouting families. I went with my admission ticket folded inside my wallet and my pulse banging in my throat. Around the third time I refreshed the page, my score appeared. Chinese 136, mathematics 149, English 142, comprehensive science 295, total 722. For one full breath I did not understand the number. Then the room around me blurred. Someone yelled that the provincial rankings had updated. Another student began crying before she had even checked her own page, just because the tension broke her open. I clicked
One more link with numb fingers.
provincial science rank 1. The internet cafe owner, who had known me since junior high and once refused me an extra steamed bun because I owed him 50 cents, slapped the counter and shouted so loudly that half the room turned.
Kiao Shanglan.
Province top scorer, I stood there, trembling. Then my knees gave way, and I had to sit down on the sticky plastic stool before I fainted from the force of surviving my own life. The village changed its face in less than 3 hours. By the time I came back from town, the loudspeaker at the entrance had already repeated my score twice. Distant relatives who had never once defended me from mockery flooded our courtyard carrying fruit, sunflower seeds, and false affection. Aunties, who used to say girls were wasted on textbooks, now praised my parents for their farsighted education. My father stood in the middle of the yard looking stunned as if fortune had mistaken him for someone else, and he was afraid it would notice the error. My mother cried while wiping the table again and again. My brother told anyone who listened that he had always known I would become famous. I did not expose any of them. Not then.
Not
Because I forgave them, but because that day no longer belonged to the people who had once tried to bend my future into something cheap. It belonged to the girl who had torn up her vocational notice and the woman she had not become. Universities began calling before sunset. Peking University, Tsinghua
University. Fudan.
Nanjing University.
The
County television station asked for an interview. The headmaster sent a car.
sun.
Liwa came in through the back door because she hated crowds and shoved a red envelope at me so hard it hurt. Old Master Ren only said, "Good." Then he turned around and hid his wet eyes by pretending to cough. The interview was held under the old locust tree outside the school auditorium.
The
Reporter asked what secret I had for success. I almost laughed. There was no secret.
there.
Had only been hunger, stubbornness, books. Borrowed until their spines cracked, problems. Redone until dawn, and the refusal to agree with anyone who said my life had already been priced. So I said that instead, though more politely. I said the world often tells girls from small places to be realistic. But realism is not the same as surrender. If you keep walking, the road changes shape beneath your
Feet.
The clip aired that evening on local television and spread to provincial media. Within 2 days, my photograph in the interview, a plain ponytail, sun-darkened skin, and eyes that looked older than 18 became the image people attached to. Headlines about rural students rising through education. I watched it all with a strange calm. Praise and contempt were both forms of
Noise.
I had learned to listen instead for the sound of doors unlocking. One of those doors opened a week later when Peking University sent a direct representative to our county with a scholarship package and fee waivers that made my father sit down so hard the bench creaked. That same night, after the representative left, my father cleared his throat and said in a tone he had never used toward me before, "When you graduate and get a city job, you must help your brother too. Family is family."
I
Looked at him across the dinner table. Steam rose from the cabbage soup between us. In my first life, I would have nodded because guilt had been the leash they used best. In this life, I took out a notebook from my bag and set it down in front of him. On the first pages, I had written every major expense they had truly spent on me since my rebirth: tuition, contribution, food, bus fares, winter socks. Beside each line, I had written what I had already repaid through field labor, housework, and cash I had brought back from tutoring, prize money, and shop work. I have done the calculation, I said. There is still 642 yuan I owe
this family for direct expenses.
I will pay it after I receive my enrollment scholarship. After that, no one gets to tell me that I was raised as an investment. My mother stared at the notebook as if it were a foreign document. My father's face darkened with insult.
My
Brother unexpectedly began laughing.
not
Mockingly, bitterly. "Sister," he said, "you really did keep accounts all these years." "Everyone I could," I said. He looked at our parents and then away. For the first time in his life, perhaps, he saw the house from somewhere other than the center. I paid the 642 yuan. Before leaving for Beijing, I placed the money on the table in front of my parents and waited until my father counted it. Then I bowed, not because I felt small, but because endings should be marked cleanly. My mother cried, again asking whether I had to be so hard.
I
Answered with the gentlest truth I could. Manage. I'm only as hard as I had to become. In this house, my brother walked me to the bus station in silence. Just before I boarded, he shoved a plastic bag into my arms. Inside were tea, eggs, and 2 packs of instant noodles. He kept his eyes on the ground.
study well, he muttered.
Don't become like any of us. Beijing was everything the village was not. Wide, loud, anonymous, merciless, alive. On registration day, I stood in the ancient red gate of the university with my suitcase and almost forgot to breathe. Students from every province moved around me like streams joining a river. Some wore expensive watches. Some wore patched shirts like the ones I had grown up with. Everyone carried the same future on their backs, equally heavy and equally invisible. When I turned the corner toward the freshman hostel, I saw Shen Yao across the road, taller than I remembered and holding 2 cups of soy milk in one hand.
"You lost the bet," he said when he reached me.
He had scored 716, first in his city, 4th in the province. I stared at the soy milk until my vision blurred. Then I laughed and took 1 cup. We had both made it. No one had carried us here. No one had opened the way out of pity. We had come by clawing steps into
Stone.
We stood under the morning sun in a city that did not know the names of our villages, and for the first time that felt like freedom. University did not make life easy, only larger. I chose economics at first because people said it led to stable futures, then switched to data science after discovering I loved patterns more than promises. Shen Yao went into engineering. We studied in different buildings but still found each other in libraries, cafeterias, and the dimly lit corners of campus where only the stubborn stayed after midnight. He remained the kind of person who sharpened his life down to purpose. I remained the kind who refused to surrender a single inch once my hands had reached the
Rope.
Around us, the city kept expanding, and
So did we.
in the second year of university, I took my first paid tutoring job in Beijing and nearly laughed from the irony of it. The girl I tutored lived in an apartment bigger than my entire childhood house. She cried over mathematics because her parents wanted 98, and she only scored 91.
I
Taught her function graphs and probability. Then went home and transferred half the money to old Master Ren despite his protests. It took me 3 years to repay every yuan of the loan with interest. When I finally went back to the county during winter break and handed him the last envelope, his hands shook more than mine did.
"You kept your promise," he said.
I answered, "You gave me the right to make one." I also went to see Sun Liwa, who pretended she had no memory of hiring a half-starved village girl to stack books after school.
I
Bought every kind of pen in her shop, and she scolded me for wasting money. Then she secretly stuffed 2 extra mechanical pencils into my bag before I left. Some people never learn to say affection plainly. I had become good at hearing it anyway. The county itself had changed too. A new supermarket. Better.
roads.
Fewer children left behind in courtyards because many had been taken to cities, yet the old logic still survived in cracks. Girls were still told to be practical. Boys were still told the world would make room for them. I wanted to break that pattern with something more useful than anger. So when I received my first substantial national scholarship in my 3rd year, I did not buy a phone or better clothes. I rented a small room above Sun Lihua's shop for one summer and turned it into a free study space for county girls preparing for high school entrance exams. 6 desks, a water dispenser, 2 old fans, donated books, and a rule written in thick black marker above the door. Your future is not a favor anybody grants you. It is work you have the right to do. Old Master Ren pretended the rent was unnecessary. I insisted on paying. Pride had once trapped
Me?
Now I used it more carefully. News of the room spread slowly. Then all at once, at first girls came secretly saying they were only there to borrow materials for a cousin. Then they came openly with notebooks, thermoses, and desperate questions. Some had fathers who wanted them to quit after junior.
Hi.
Some had brothers who tutoring already.
At hey, hat, how the hat,
Some had nothing, except grades, and the fear of losing even. That I taught them the way I had once wanted. To be taught, not like broken things needing rescue, but like people building tools with their own hands. More than once I stayed until midnight, listening to their worries and watching their back straighten little by little. When I graduated, I did not become the story people expected. I was offered positions in 2 major firms in Shanghai and Shenzhen.
The
Salaries would have made my parents faint.
I
Took one in Beijing for 3 years, learned how numbers moved companies and how power disguised itself in conference rooms, and then left to build an education technology platform focused on county-level exam access. It was not glamorous. Investors doubted the market. My relatives said I was foolish to turn down stable elite work. But the first product we built was a low-bandwidth problem bank designed for schools with poor internet.
The
Day we received letters from 3 rural schools thanking us for their student score jumps. I felt something inside me settle. Shen Yao came into the company a year later. Not because of me, he insisted, but because he had become tired of designing components no one could afford. He headed product engineering. We argued constantly and effectively. At 30, I finally understood that some relationships are strongest not when one person saves the other, but when both people arrive carrying their own hard-won light. One autumn evening, after a long meeting, he walked with me past the office windows while the city went gold outside and asked, without any performance at all, do you still think a life with softness in it is a dangerous thing? I considered that. Then I answered, not if the softness knows how to stand. We married quietly the following spring. No spectacle, no bride price, no bargaining over furniture or gold. At the small dinner, afterward, old Master Ren drank too much and cried into his sleeves. Son Li Hua complained that the restaurant's tea was terrible.
my
Brother came in a clean shirt, and for once, no one at his side treated him like a prince or a burden. He had become a vocational teacher, not a glamorous path, but an honest one. And before leaving, he said to Shen Yao, if you ever make my sister feel like she has to pay for the right to breathe, I will stop being polite. Shen Yao nodded gravely and said, that seems fair. I almost laughed into
My cup.
as for my parents, time did what my fury could not. It wore down certainty. My father aged badly. My mother grew smaller every year.
I
Helped when they were sick and paid for medicine when it was urgent, but I did it with boundaries so clear they could not mistake kindness for ownership. It took them a long time to understand that love given late is not the same as control given early. I'm not sure they ever fully did. Not every wound becomes
wisdom.
some simply scar over and ache when
The weather changes.
the study room above Sun Li Hua's shop eventually became a proper county girls'
Scholarship fund?
then a reading room, then a series of summer camps supported by former students who had once sat at those 6 desks under 2 struggling fans. The sign above the door changed too. We painted over the old sentence and replaced it with another one. I had earned at greater cost be the sunlight you needed. When the first girl from our program entered Tsinghua, the village loudspeaker announced it with the same crackling speaker that had once praised sons and warned daughters not to want too much.
I
Listened from my car at the edge of the road and felt the past fold quietly into itself. Sometimes journalists still ask me what changed my fate. I tell them the truth though. It never fits the neat story they want.
Fate.
Changed because I got another chance, yes, but chances alone are worthless if a person still bows in the same direction.
what really
Changed me was the moment I understood that pity is not salvation. Sacrifice is not virtue. When forced and family is not wholly if it feeds on your future. I changed when I learned to measure my life not by who approved of it, but by whether I was walking towards something wide enough to hold me. On certain nights when I work too late and the office windows reflect only darkness, I still think of the factory dormitory fire from my first life. I think of the remittance slip in my pocket, the smoke and the girls screaming from the upper bunks. I no longer think of that girl with pity. I think of her as the one who pushed me hardest. She died inside a locked room. I walked back through flames to open a door. That is not the same.
Story.
It never will be. Last winter, I returned to the county for the scholarship interviews and found a nervous 15-year-old waiting outside the reading room before dawn. She wore a cotton jacket too, thin for the cold, and had her admission score card folded so many times the paper was almost soft. My father says girls from our village never stay in school long, she said before I could ask anything. He says I should learn
Hairdressing.
Her chin trembled, but her eyes did not drop. I looked at her and saw my own stubbornness staring back through time. Then I opened the door wider and said, good. Then, let us make your father wrong.